This is the Black Powder Podcast, coming at you live and direct.
Your salty tears season my life. It's the Black Powder Podcast.
And once again, it's on. This is the Black Powder Podcast, the only real libertarian podcast that is hosted tonight by the only real libertarian, by myself. We were like going back to the old school where it was just me because my co-host couldn't make it tonight. But that just gives me a chance to shine. And that's the important part about this podcast is me. And the fact that I bring you the liberty from basically all around the United States. And today we're going international with the liberty. You know, normally we like to stick to local candidates, federal candidates, state candidates, and things of that nature. But occasionally we like to go towards bringing you the rabble rousers, so to speak. I myself, being a professional rabble rouser, it's something I cherish. And with that being said, well, we got our first comment of the night from my good friend Amity. How's my favorite libertarian? I'm great, and I really appreciate you asking how I'm doing, because not enough people worry about me, and I worry about everybody. And I'm tired of you people being selfish. And with that being said, that was my banter. I didn't have anybody to talk to. I'm mad at Tub and Eric. But going back to the rabble rousing and going back to spreading liberty on an international scale, tonight we are going down under, so to speak. I'm sure everybody has always introduced him like that, down under, g'day, and all that good stuff. But here we're going to give him a LA what's up, what's happening. And without further ado, we're bringing in our guest tonight from the great country of Australia, Mr. Topher Field. How are we doing tonight, my good man?
Marcus.
That's awesome. You're here doing this little tour of America. Before we get into the nitty gritty and all that stuff, what's your, I'm sure this isn't your first time here, but what's been your impression of this last stay here in the great states of the United States?
Look, this is my 8th trip to the US, and I absolutely love it here. I genuinely, and I say this publicly all the time, I genuinely believe that the US is the greatest country that there has ever been. And people get upset with me in Australia. They're like, you can't be a true Australian if you think America is so great. I'm like, no. I love Australia. Don't get me wrong. I love Australia. But objectively, America is the greatest country that has ever existed. There has never been another country like you guys. And sadly, if you guys lose your freedom, there probably never will be another country like you. And that's what brings me here. My main message is actually what's written on my cap here. You know, too many people come into America and they want to tell you what's wrong with America and how you need to fix it. And they'll usually say, you know, the problem with America is that you should be more like Europe, or you should be more like Australia or Canada or UK or wherever. No. Screw all those guys. You should tar them, feather them, and like kick them out of your country, never let them back in. The problem with America is that you are not enough like 1776, right? You've allowed Europeans and other people to begin to creep in with the surveillance state, with the abolition of rights. And I know your rights are enumerated in your constitution and the amendments, and you've got separation of power, and these are all good things. But you know, the thing that I realized, Marcus, during my time, I was on the front lines of all the COVID lockdowns in Australia. The one thing, the only thing historically that has ever actually been a guarantor of liberty, has actually limited the power of government, is the people reaching the limit of their obedience. And so that's what I'm all about. I love that you're a fellow rabble rouser. I like to call myself a dissident. It just sounds a little more sophisticated. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. I am here to limit my obedience to government, to limit its power in my life, and to try and encourage other people to do the same thing. So I'm on a 9-week speaking tour over here. I've spoken at a bunch of conferences, Freedom Fest and the Atlas Society's Galt's Gulch, and I'm about to head to Cincinnati in a few days' time, speaking at the Young Americans for Liberty. Then I'm in Colorado speaking at the Western Conservative Summit. And in the meantime, I get to do really important things and special things like sitting here and talking with you on the Black Powder podcast.
That's awesome. I posted his website here, topherfield.com. Go check him out, buy him a coffee. We try to help people out in that regard, especially if they're doing the right thing. We have another comment here from Free minus 100 to Marcus for being on at the same time as me. Yeah, and 200 to for being. This, honestly, I don't like to compete with Free because, you know, he's a lot shorter than me. And, you know, there's no sport in beating up special needs kids. So that's a personal phrase of mine. Feel free to use it appropriately in your comments to everybody. But yeah, we just had a massive scheduling conflict here, and this was the date that we can agree on. So I want to thank everybody. This isn't our normal night. We'll probably get most of our views on the tail end. Hopefully everybody can like and share and do all of that good stuff. So we're going to dive right into this podcast because we have a number of subjects to talk about. And the first one, you know, this truly bothers me about Australia is you guys had an incidence of what they quote unquote mass shooting or whatever. And then you guys and the Kiwis had similar incidents, and then there was similar outcomes where they basically stripped you guys of your gun rights almost completely, is my understanding, right?
Yeah. Look, we can still own firearms, but you have to give what's called a lawful excuse. So you have to get a license first. And in order to get a license, you have to be able to prove that you're a member of a gun club or that you have land that you can shoot on to control pests and so forth. And self-defense is explicitly excluded. Self-defense is not considered a legitimate excuse to want to own a gun in Australia. So handguns are very hard to get. And even if you are a member of a pistol shooting club, if you get your license and then you're able to get a handgun because you have to apply for every single gun that you want to buy in addition to getting a license, then the handgun has to stay at the club. And so forget having guns for self-defense. It's kind of out of the question. But what happened in 1996 was a terrible massacre. 30 plus people were killed in Tasmania, which is an island state off the south of Australia. And that was used by our then Prime Minister, our allegedly conservative Prime Minister, John Howard, as an excuse to do a gun buyback. So he outlawed basically all semi-automatics, a lot of pump action shotguns, and a lot of other stuff as well, and made it very difficult, very expensive, and a lot of paperwork to be able to own guns. Now, that's been the status quo in Australia since 1996. So we're pushing obviously 30 years now that we've had that. What's really interesting to me is that attitudes in Australia now are finally changing. A lot of Australians have regarded the gun bans and the restrictions as a really good thing, but actually only just recently we're seeing a radical shift in attitudes, and that's for a couple of reasons. Australia is in the grip of its worst violent crime wave that we've ever had in the country. We're seeing home invasions, we're seeing carjackings, we're seeing fire bombings, and we are seeing a bunch of shootings. Guns are actually readily available. If you're a criminal and you're happy just to go to whomever to get whatever firearms are available at the time, it is not difficult to buy a gun in Australia. It's just difficult to get one legally in Australia. And this is the unfortunate reality. We are an island nation. Australia is about the same size as the United States if you ignore Alaska. It's about the same size physically, but we have the population, it's less than Florida. So imagine the population of Florida spread out over the size of the US. We are an island nation. Nothing gets into Australia without coming on a plane or a boat. We are relatively wealthy and we have relatively low levels of corruption. And yet, despite having all of those advantages, we can't keep guns out of the hands of criminals. They have no trouble getting them. And so what we're seeing in Australia now, because criminals know that law-abiding people are disarmed, they know they can kick a door down and they're not going to be faced with a gun on the other side. They know they can go up to a mother who's trying to put her kids into a minivan in a shopping center car park and hijack that car, and that woman is not going to have a gun in her handbag or on her person. So what we've seen now is a rise in violent crimes where they're targeting people when they're at home. They're not stealing cars. When I was a kid, if someone was going to rob your home, they would try and make sure no one was there when they did it. If they were going to steal your car, they'd steal it from the car park when no one was looking. Now they target you when you are there because they want to terrorize you into giving up all of your valuables or giving up the car keys. And they're doing that because they know that we are defenseless. So what's happened, particularly in my former home state of Victoria, which is in the south on the mainland of Australia, we are in the grip of genuinely the most horrific violent crime wave that we've ever seen. I've spent a bit of time talking to John Lott. I'm sure that's a name that you'd be familiar with. John is a foremost kind of statistician on crime. I interviewed him when he came to Sydney, and I already knew a lot, but he taught me things I didn't already know. Because of differences in how the statistics are done, Australia is now more violent than the US on everything except for murder. In every other violent crime category, we're actually worse than the US. Now, people say, oh, but that's okay. Like murder's the worst one. Okay, that's fine. But it's also the rarest one. And so if we're worse for home invasions, for carjackings, for rapes, for really heinous violent crimes, that's a big problem. So this idea that getting rid of the guns has saved us all is a real misnomer. When you look at the statistics around deaths specifically, our murder rate was already declining before the gun ban came in 1996, and it continued to decline after the gun ban without really any meaningful change. So they've tried to argue, well, the gun ban saved lives because the average after the gun ban is below the average before the gun ban, but it was already declining. So whatever point you pick along that line, the after is always going to look better than the before because it was a declining trend. You could pick 1994, 2 years before the gun ban, and it would still look the same way. So the gun ban didn't make a statistically significant difference. But here's the real kicker, Marcus. In December last year, we had the Bondi massacre. Now, the big promise, the big claim of the gun grabbers was that because we got rid of our guns, we don't have mass shootings. That doesn't happen in Australia. Now, that's not actually true. We've had lots of multiple casualty events. Some people killing people using fires, some people killing a lot of people using cars, and a small number of events where people have used guns. So it was never really true. But the Bondi massacre really made it obvious that it was a lie. And I believe it was 14 or 15 Jewish people at a celebration on Bondi Beach were murdered by 2 Islamic terrorists. And here's the thing, they used bolt action and straight pull firearms to do it. They didn't need the semi-automatics. They didn't need a machine gun to be able to carry out a massacre. Because their victims were so completely disarmed, they were able to use grandpa's bolt action rifle and do terrible, terrible things. Now, what's been really interesting is the public reaction to that. Obviously, people are heartbroken, people are outraged, of course, as they should be. But the government, the prime minister that we have at the moment, Anthony Albanese, he said, right, I'm going to do what John Howard did, and I'm going to do another gun buyback. We're going to take a bunch more guns off you. We're going to buy them back. We're going to, he was trying to be John Howard 2.0. What's really interesting, Marcus, is that only one Australian state has actually signed up to that program and agreed to do it. Most of the Australian states have actually said, no, we're good. We're not going to support another federal gun buyback. We're not going to participate in that. And that indicates to you, like they're reading the political tea leaves. They're looking at what's going to be popular and thinking about the electoral consequences of what they do. And they're realizing that the Australian attitude towards guns is not as negative as what it used to be. And even in the aftermath of another massacre, supporting gun buybacks isn't actually a politically winning strategy. Now, where it gets really interesting for me, because of the way that our gun laws work, guns are almost never used in self-defense because you have to have the gun locked up, you have to have the ammunition locked up separately, and then you have to have the firing pin removed. So anytime someone ever uses a gun defensively, the question has to be asked, well, were you storing your gun correctly? Because you were able to get it just a little bit too fast, right? It was a little bit too accessible to you. But there was an amazing sequence of events that happened in rural New South Wales, one of our most populated states. A man by the name of Keith Blessing and his wife Di. You can look this up. This hit the news in a big way in Australia. A man kicked his way into their home in rural Australia. The police are a half an hour away if you're lucky. And he brought a knife with him and he stabbed them both terribly. Keith ended up in intensive care for 3 days. That's how bad his injuries were. But the man came into their home, kicked down the door, stabbed them both, and then left. Then Keith called our version of 911, which is 000. He called the police and reported it, and the police are on their way, but they're a half an hour away. The attacker came back to finish the job, probably realized, hang on, I've left witnesses, I need to go and kill them. And so the attacker is now trying to kick his way back through a different door because they blockaded the one that he came in through. And that sequence of events meant that Keith was able to get his gun, load it, and he shot the attacker when he came into his house the second time. Now, the reason this matters in the Australian context is because even the Premier of Victoria was forced to call Keith a hero for using a gun to defend himself. The media called him a hero. The police chief called him a hero. I've never seen it in Australia before where someone using a gun in self-defense resulted in positive media coverage. It simply never happened. So when you put it all together, we have a situation where people are sick of the gun bans, they're sick of the buybacks, they're not buying into it anymore. Even in the wake of a massacre, people are not supporting more gun buybacks. People are more aware than ever before of the need for personal self-defense. They know that they are disarmed and they know that criminals are taking advantage of it. And now we've had a high-profile event that really showcased the usefulness, the value of guns for self-defense. You put it all together, and I think what we're seeing in Australia is that we're sick and tired of being used as the example of gun control that works. It doesn't. It disarms us. It leaves us helpless. And attitudes in Australia are really, really shifting. What that's going to mean in the future, well, we can talk about that. It's hard to predict, but there is a big political shift going on. And I think if elections in the next 1 or 2 electoral cycles go the way that I hope they do, we might see some changes to our laws. But that's kind of speculative. What I can say for sure is that the cultural attitude is definitely changing.
That's what you touched on something I wanted to follow up. What are the gun laws? Do you have the right to own a firearm in Australia, or if it's solely at the licensing of the government selling you back the right to own a firearm?
Yeah, so you have to apply for a license in order to own a gun. You have to tell them why you want to have a gun. It has to be what's called a lawful excuse. And then the police can deny your application if they deem that you are not a fit and proper person. Now, they can literally use anything they want to come to this determination. And what we're seeing at the moment is they will use your social media against you. If you've said anti-government things, if you have attitudes that they don't like, they will say, well, look, you've failed the character test. We don't think that you're a fit and proper person. And that doesn't mean that you've got a criminal record or anything like that. It just means that you've said things, beg your pardon, you've said things on the internet that the government doesn't like. Now, where this gets really weaponized, to answer your question before I move on to the next thing, then after you've got the license, you need to apply for each gun that you want to buy. And so there are restrictions. Each state is different, but there are restrictions on calibers. So particularly in Western Australia, they've taken off the public can no longer own things like 50 BMG and other long range, more powerful kind of calibers. And then in places like New South Wales, they've just passed a law in the wake of the Bondi massacre, limiting the number of guns that you're allowed to own to 4. Now, anyone that is any sort of if you're a landowner, if you've got pests that you need to control, you need more than 4 different calibers, 4 different guns. You might have a 420 shotgun to deal with snakes. You might have a 22 just to keep your eye in practice and maybe shoot rabbits. Then you're going to need something a bit bigger to deal with foxes and things out at longer range. And then you're going to need something with some serious punch if you've got to deal with feral pigs. And then already you've run out and you haven't even got a 12 gauge shotgun at that point. If you're a bird hunter or something like that, you've already run out of your 4 guns. So at every layer, depending on where you live, at every layer, there are more and more restrictions and blocks in place to make it harder and harder for you to be able to own a gun. Then every few years, you have to renew your license and the police will review it again. and decide if you're still a fit and proper person. And if they decide that you're not, then you have to give up all of your guns, and all of the investment, etc., is lost. You can sell them, but then you have to take whatever price you can get, because you have to sell them pretty quick. So they've kind of got you by the balls. If you're a gun owner in Australia, they've kind of got you. And that was really illustrated during the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, my former home city of Melbourne. I was on the front lines of all the madness there. I know in America, you saw some viral sort of news footage of some of just how crazy we got in Australia. And I'm talking to a lot of Americans, and I know it got bad in places in America. And I mean no disrespect to those who endured those circumstances in America. But can I tell you, nowhere was like Melbourne. It was truly the most locked down city in the world, outside of China itself. When China started welding doors shut of their apartment buildings, that's when they took over from us as the most locked down city in the world. But we had over 570 days of lockdowns. We had some of the strictest rules that were violently enforced, including armored cars in the streets, police assaulting people, shooting people with rubber bullets en masse. Just not even, it was crazy. Anyway, one of the things that they did during that time, so I was involved in the protests against the lockdowns. We were saying, end the lockdowns, let people be free, reopen businesses, reopen churches, let us live. And what they would do is they would bring cameras. The police would bring cameras to the protests, and they would film everybody who was in the protest, and they would use facial recognition. And when they identified a person who was a gun owner, they would go to their house and threaten them and say, if you show up to one more protest, we are going to deem that you are no longer a fit and proper person to have guns. We're going to take all your guns. We're going to take your license. And that's going to be that. You'll never be able to get guns in Australia again. So the system is incredibly strict. They are vicious about denying gun owners basic due process and their rights. And if you are a gun owner, they will hold it over you. They will use it as leverage to control you and to stop you from speaking out.
That is absolutely, that's, I'm here in California, which is the 4th largest economy in the world. I say that every podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
And we're run by this ultra liberal Gavin Newsom.
Sure.
And Australia sounds like his wet dream.
Yeah.
That is nuts to me, that the government that, because here in the United States, a lot of Americans don't know this, but a law enforcement agency went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States to codify the fact that they have no legal obligation to protect you.
Yeah.
That's the thing. When government takes away your right to protect yourself, and at the same time will not guarantee your protection, that is a call for civil disobedience. That is against all of mankind's natural rights altogether.
You're 100% right. And we have the same thing in Australia. The police are not liable for what happens to you, protect you at any level. They can just be not there. They don't have resources, whatever it is, they can be not there to protect you. They are never liable. But you're not allowed to have a gun, let alone pepper spray or any, we can't have tasers. We can't have anything in order to protect ourselves. And the excuse is, that's why we have the police. You need to call the police. They'll protect you. Well, okay, but they're not liable if they fail. I'll be dead or whatever's happened to me because the police failed to protect me. So what this means in practice is what we actually have in Australia is a protection racket. The government are running a protection racket for the protection of violent criminals. Yeah. The government will use violence to make sure that we are disarmed and helpless, that there's nothing we can do to protect ourselves. And it is essentially so that criminals can go and carry out crimes without personal risk to their own personal safety.
I'm just beside myself on that. Here in the United States, currently we're moving in the right direction as far as we had I think it was the 3rd Circuit or whatever in New Jersey overturned a so-called assault weapons ban, and they threw in the standard capacity magazines on that, and the Supreme Court said next session they're actually going to review, because we have a lot of differing opinions in all the circuit courts in the United States, and that's where I don't know why this has taken so long, because we've had like the 2nd and 3rd Circuit say assault weapon bans are unconstitutional. Then you have the 9th Circuit, where I am, that says they're constitutional. and the Supreme Court's supposed to decide this. And so they're finally taking up the case. So this time next year, we should have a blanket gun policy where states cannot infringe upon your right to own a certain weapon or a standard capacity magazine. And it's going to be nice because it's going to bring down prices. That's what I keep telling people. Once California gets access to regular, because what a lot of people don't know is you still can own an AR-15 and an AK-47 in California. You can own a M249, which is the SAW, but it's semi-automatic. It's not fully automatic. You can own that, but it'll have some stupid modifications on it that make it somewhat impractical. So we're not completely a totalitarian state, unfortunately, like Australia, but we're not as free as our neighboring states, Nevada and Arizona, where you could go there and just buy just about anything. Now, I wanted to pivot to, you had mentioned the COVID lockdowns, and I think that might have been the first time I saw you was your civil disobedience. And I was perusing your X page, and you had a picture with Rosa Parks, a statue. And I was reading some of the comments, and I was like, one person said this was a psyop. First of all, my parents grew up in Alabama. Both of them graduated from high school in 1968. And they saw all of that. There was no psyop. It was a dangerous time for a lot of people that looked like us back then. And so I took kind of personal offense to that. But, I keep it moving. Ignorance is bliss. But COVID, it wasn't as bad as the time frame where my parents grew up. But it infringed upon everybody's personal liberty. And that's why I always say, if you don't defend the liberty of someone you may detest, one day that person, whatever they were going through, we're all in the same line. And that's one day they're going to call your number. That's and so can you tell people about your experience throughout that?
Yeah, well, before I get to that, I want to comment on the Rosa Parks thing. So someone that I talk about, I'm in the US on a speaking tour at the moment. I'm speaking at conferences all over the place. And one of the people that I talk about every chance I get is Claudette Colvin. Yep. Now, most people don't know who she is. I take it from your reaction that you do. So for those that don't know, Claudette Colvin was Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks was Rosa Parks. 9 months earlier in Montgomery County, Alabama, she refused to move to the back of the bus. Now, what happened was the civil rights movement was kind of organizing. They knew they needed a court case. They knew they needed something to be able to run, to be able to advance the cause. And they actually thought maybe Claudette might be the person. The problem is, and I write about this in my first book. So my first book is titled Good People Break Bad Laws. And I have a chapter that is actually titled In Defense of Assholes. And the reason why I wrote this chapter is because by definition, the kind of person that is willing to go first on any issue is an outlier. They are not your average person. They have a different personality type, a different psychology, a different risk tolerance. They don't care about social consequences and people not liking them. And so what that means is that person who's willing to go first is often a bit of an asshole. There's someone who isn't well liked, or they're precocious. They create a lot of trouble. And Claudette Colvin was no exception. So she got arrested for doing the right thing, refusing to be discriminated against on the basis of her race, of her skin color. But she was mouthy and she was lippy, and she got in trouble during the arrest. And then the thing that actually made the biggest difference, she got pregnant out of wedlock.
Yeah.
So she was a 15-year-old black girl in Montgomery, Alabama, in the Deep South in the 1960s. And the civil rights movement said, well, we can't run her as our court case anymore. Like, there is no jury that's going to look favorably on this girl anymore. And that's when Rosa Parks, who was already working, she was a secretary within the organization, she said, well, if I go and do the same thing and they arrest me, then we run the court case around me and I'll keep my nose clean and not get some of this other stuff going on. And so the people who say it was a setup, they're completely missing the point, but they're kind of technically not wrong. Rosa Parks walked into that, and this is to take nothing away from her courage, nothing at all. But she stepped into that, and she acknowledges that Claudette Colvin was the inspiration. That's where she got the idea. And that's what allowed them to then run the court case around Rosa. And we all remember Rosa, and there is a tribute to Rosa in Dallas. That's where I took the photo. I was wearing my Good People Break Bad Laws t-shirt, and I got the photo there with Rosa. And I think she deserves all of the credit that she's received. But I think Claudette Colvin deserves far more credit than what she's received as the person, that outlier, that, if I may say, that sort of asshole personality who actually went out there when there was nothing in it for her. There was nothing to gain. She just did it because she believed in it. So she's been an inspiration of mine actually since before COVID. I knew about her and I knew about her story, and I was talking about her publicly before COVID came along. Now, when COVID came along, like a lot of people, at first I was kind of like, look, this could be really bad. I don't know. We don't have the data yet. Obviously, the media is telling me that this is going to be a really bad virus, all the rest of it. And they said 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And I wasn't happy with that, but I kind of kept my mouth shut. I was like, let's just see how this plays out, because, you know, maybe this makes sense. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But as soon as they added a third week, alarm bells went off in my head. And I went, well, no, they're making it up as they go along. They don't know what they're doing. And these lockdowns, if these lockdowns start to carry on, they're going to do way more harm than good. And so then I began to make videos speaking out against COVID, against the lockdowns. And my position was, we need to protect those who are vulnerable. So that's the elderly and those with comorbidities. We knew that in March 2020. We knew who was vulnerable and who was not. We had the data by then. Yeah. We need to protect those people, but let everyone else go free. Let us take our chances. I want to run my business. I want to do my work. I want to go out socially. I'm going to catch COVID. And statistically speaking, I'm at a next to zero chance of dying from it. And I'm willing to take that chance. But of course, the government didn't give us that choice. So what happened, because I was being pretty outspoken, and as far as I'm aware, I was the first first person with a public profile to speak out against the lockdowns. And I was therefore invited to speak. Someone organized a protest against the lockdowns. Now, you got to keep in mind that the government had declared a state of emergency, and they said protest is illegal. Now, I'm not a protester. I've not been I wasn't raised to, attending protests with my parents, or, when I was a teenager, when I was at university age. I wasn't in that scene. But I think if there's one time you need to protest, it's when the government says you're not allowed to, right? The one time you better be pretty protective of your rights is when the government says, oh, it's an emergency, you can't exercise your rights. It's like, no, hang on. That's not how this works. So I was invited to speak. This woman was organizing the very first formal, sort of publicly advertised anti-lockdown protest. And I said yes, I agreed to do it. And that was a big turning point for me, because I'd been a clean skin up to that point. I'd been a square. I'd been such a well-behaved goody two-shoes. It's embarrassing now to think back on just how well-behaved I'd been. I'm a pastor's kid. I was raised in the church. I was a good boy. I joined the army. I was in the infantry, never deployed, but, honorable discharge. I did all the things. I did all the things that you're supposed to do as a good boy. And here I was, about to become a dissident, about to become a COVID-denying, grandma-killing, they threw everything at us. They called us neo-Nazis. They called us grandma killers. They called us science deniers. They called us everything they could possibly think of. So I actually drove. So I advertised that first protest in the morning of the protest, because if we told everyone about it a week before, they would have just arrested us. The cops would have just come and arrested us. We wouldn't have been able to go. So I posted about it on the morning on all my social media pages. I had a few tens of thousands of followers. And then I drove. It was an hour away from my house, and I drove. And my gut was like a washing machine. I was so conflicted about what I was doing and whether it was right, whether it was wrong, whether it was worth it. Am I going to achieve anything? Like, the cops are going to arrest me. I'm going to end up with a criminal record. Who knows how this is going to affect my wife and my kids and everything else. And there's probably going to be nothing achieved. Like, I'm probably not going to be able to actually look back on that and say it was worth it, because it probably won't be. That's the honest truth. When you're doing these things in real time, you don't have the advantage of knowing. Like, when we read about the Declaration of Independence and those guys in the Civil War, we know that they win in the end. But they didn't know that when they were making those decisions. And so I'm sitting there in the car driving, and my gut is churning. And I arrive, and I park the car, and I look across at this park where we're going to have this protest, and the cops are already there. They've already got a half a dozen cops here and a couple of cars, and no doubt there were more on the way. And I sat there, and an enormous part of me wanted to I'll just grab my phone, I'll delete all those posts off my social media, and I'll drive home and pretend this never happened. And life goes on as normal. Nothing has to change. I can have my life back. The problem was, I knew that I would know that I was a coward. And you know how it is, Marcus, and everyone watching, you read a book and you identify with the hero. You watch a movie, you identify with the rebels, with the heroes, with the people that stood up. And we all want to be that person who's got courage, but none of us actually know who we are until we face a real test. And this was a real test. And I was sitting there terrified that I might be about to discover that I'm a coward. That was the fear. I might be about to find out against my will that I don't have what it takes. And so what I did was I pulled my phone out of my pocket and I started a live stream on Facebook. And because everyone was locked down, no one was at work, thousands of people piled in and started watching it really quickly. And I told them on this live stream, I said, I've parked the car, the cops are over there. I showed them on the camera, this is what's going on. I'm about to get out of the car. I'm going to walk across there and I don't know what's going to happen. And what that did was it gave me accountability. I could see that there were over 1,000 people watching in real time. And I knew that if I was a coward then the whole world would know that I was a coward. And that I kind of bullied myself. I manipulated myself into getting out of my car and going and speaking. And what happened was the police didn't know what to do. This was early days. This was before all the violence and the arrests and the horses charging through us and the armored cars and the rubber bullets. None of that had happened yet. And the police didn't know what they were doing either. So what they did was they said, listen, we're going to come back at 11 o'clock. And if there's anyone left here, we're going to arrest you. And we looked at our watches and went, right, we've got 55 minutes to hold our protest and then get out of here. And so that's what we did. So I spoke and a few different people spoke and I live streamed the entire event. By the time I got home, more than 100,000 people had watched the live stream. Wow. And I got this avalanche of hate from people calling me every name under the sun. But then I got this wave of encouragement, people reaching out to me saying, thank you. I thought I was going crazy, but everything you've said is what I was thinking, but I thought I was the only one. And then people began to reach out to me just wanting to tell their story of how the lockdowns were affecting them, mental health crises and family violence and bankruptcies and all kinds of things. And so at that point, that's when I kind of knew, well, I'm in this fight now and I've got to see this through. Now, I had no idea that that was going to mean 570 plus days of madness. I had no idea that it was going to mean I would be living like an organized crime boss. My family was prepared for me to be arrested at any time. All of my data on my laptop and my phone was backed up off-site all of the time. We were living with, I had lawyers and other people kind of on speed dial. Like we were living with this siege mentality for years, as I was one of the people. And let me be clear, I was not the only person. There were amazing people that stepped up in really incredible ways. But I was one of the people, and I was there, and this madness unfolded over 18 months, leading ultimately to some really, really grotesque violations of human rights. Police literally lining up like a firing squad and opening fire with rubber bullets against unarmed protesters. We weren't burning buildings down, we weren't looting, we weren't vandalizing, we weren't smashing, none of that was happening. In fact, often when the police came at us, we would sit down. We would actively sit, we were kind of taking the Mahatma Gandhi approach to this thing of if we demonstrate our non-aggression, our non-violence, then their violence against us becomes a real stain on their conscience. And it was 18 months. And then finally, through a specific chain of events that I cover in my documentary, finally, Victoria Police eventually went, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. Our conscience can't take this anymore. And so it wasn't actually the government that ended the lockdowns. It was Victoria Police who said to the government, we're not enforcing the lockdowns anymore. And that's why we actually became free after 18 months.
That's nuts. It kind of, to wrap this back around to the point where I was saying, if you're not going to defend somebody's rights you don't like, it's going to come back to bite you. Because what I often tell people in America, my kids got taken, they were both in high school. They got taken out of high school in March 2020. Everybody knows who was president then. And then they say it was that 2-week thing. And I was like, okay, maybe, April, May, they might finish the school year or whatever it is, or, we'll just pick it up next year. And then they continued on. And then we got a new president. And what did he do? He put those lockdowns on steroids.
Yep.
So a lot of people get comfortable in their choices in this duopoly two-party system that we have here, thinking that their guys are the good guys. when you let your guys do things and you think, oh yeah, well, we're owning these libs or we're owning these conservatives.
Yeah.
That what I call it a pendulum of stupidity here. It's going to swing back the other way eventually.
Yep.
And all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. In the US, it's so clear to me, you know, people are celebrating. And look, let me say this before I say what I'm about to say. I think Trump is a mixed bag. He's done some good stuff. He's done some really dumb stuff. If someone wants to make a better of two evils argument, I'm in agreement. I think he was the lesser of the available evils, but we have to still be honest about the scorecard, and the scorecard is very, very mixed. But a lot of what he's done through executive orders. And the problem is that can be undone instantly. The next president can undo that. And in fact, the next president will use the fact that the previous president used executive orders as their excuse to then go and do whatever they want to do using executive orders. The same with the war powers limitations and so forth. If we allow any president, whether they're on our side or not, and let's be honest, none of them are on our side, but whoever they are, whether we voted for them or not, if we allow them to trample on the separation of powers, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, there is no such a thing as a trivial violation of our rights. And there is no such a thing as the end justifies the means when it comes to violating the principles upon which your nation was founded. And it doesn't matter who's doing it, you have to stand up and say no, because even if you agree with what they're trying to achieve, they're setting a precedent that is going to be used against you in the future.
Absolutely. And I want to segue that into your America 250. And
sure.
What you thought about it as you witnessed it here, and your general opinion on it.
Well, this is my message to America. All right. There is too much 1984, by which I mean the book, George Orwell, and there is not enough 1776. You guys have in your DNA an understanding of what needs to be done, but for some reason, you're not doing it. Now, the fundamental principle is what I said at the opening of the podcast. The limit of government power is defined by the limit of the people's obedience. So if you believe in limited government, and every American says, yeah, I believe in limited government. Okay, that requires that you believe in limiting your obedience. There must be a point at which you say no. And at an individual level, at a personal level, you say, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm not going to keep doing this. Government, you're wrong, and I'm not going to obey. Or government, you're wrong, and I'm going to do that thing even though you say that I shouldn't. Then the question becomes, how do we do this? Because some people use civil disobedience as an excuse for rioting, for arson, for genuine violence against other people. So I wrote my first book, Good People Break Bad Laws, to explore civil disobedience in the modern age. And what happened was I realized people can recognize the value and the virtue of civil disobedience when it happened 40 years ago, 60 years ago. They go, oh yeah, that's clearly correct. But when it happens in front of them, they can't see it the same way. So I wrote my first book to explore that issue and to really help people to understand, what does civil disobedience in the modern age look like? And what is it? Beg your pardon.
No worries.
What is it and what isn't it? How do we stop these people that use civil disobedience as an excuse for vandalism, for arson, for violence? But then I got attacked because people said to me, how can you advocate for civil disobedience whilst calling yourself a Christian?
No, that's interesting. No, that's very interesting, because I remember somebody flipping over tables in a story I read one time. But yeah,
well, that's right. And so they'd say to me, you know, haven't you read Romans chapter 13? Haven't you read 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13? I'm like, yes. Haven't you read the rest of the book? Like, haven't you read the whole thing? Everyone that we call a hero in the Bible, we call them a hero because they were standing up against the authorities of their day. So I wrote my second book, which is Good Christians Break Bad Laws. But in that journey, what happened was I was speaking at a conference in Sydney, in Australia, and Spike Cohen, a mutual friend of ours, was there. And he heard me speak, and he came up to me afterwards. We barely knew each other. He came to me, he said, Topher, that is the message that every American needs to hear. And that was really the genesis. And 3 years later, finally, here I am, and I'm speaking in America. My message is very, very simple. You guys are the greatest nation on earth. And too many Americans think that you're the greatest nation on earth because you are so wealthy and because you are so powerful. But those are actually symptoms. They're not the cause of your greatness. The cause of your greatness is your freedom. The wealth and the power is a consequence of that. But what's happening now is that Americans are focusing on the wealth and the power. If they're comfortable, if they've got money coming in, if they're doing well, and the military is strong and America is the great superpower, make America great again. Notice it wasn't make America free again, right? And again, I like some of what Trump has done, but make America great again. No, greatness is the symptom. It's what happens when you are truly free. And your predecessors, your founders, pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor in pursuit of freedom, not in pursuit of wealth, not in pursuit of power, in pursuit of freedom. And my concern today is that Americans are not even willing to risk their Netflix subscription. They're not willing to risk having their Facebook page deleted because they said the wrong thing. They're not willing to risk their comfort and their wealth. And unfortunately, what that means is, I'm sorry to be really blunt, but you are not the children of 1776.
No.
Now, I don't mean that for every single person. I mean that for the Americans that are not willing to pay any price for freedom. You do not deserve your ancestors. You do not deserve your founders. I'm sorry to be blunt, but you don't. And what's happened is the spirit of 1984, government control, surveillance, the rewriting of history, the rewriting of language, the self-policing because you don't want to get in trouble. That has become a dominant culture within the United States of America. And my question, I start all of my talks by asking this question. I say, well, congratulations on 250 years since the Declaration of Independence. You know, congratulations, well done. Quick question though. If you keep going in the direction that you are, raise your hand if you believe you will still be the land of the free on your 500th birthday. You know, no one raises their hand. Everyone understands, every American understands that if you keep going in the current direction, it does not end well for freedom. And that's true across political lines. Democrats, Republicans, people who don't bother voting, everyone understands that the current direction leads you away from freedom. And so the question becomes, what has to change? What needs to happen in order for America to chart a path back towards freedom? And I believe that's where civil disobedience comes in. That's where limiting your obedience comes in, because that's what the founding fathers did. That's what you were built on. Ordinary people being able to say, hang on, our government is out of line and we are going to risk our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to pull it back into line, or to form a new government, to chart a new path for ourselves if we can't get the crown of England to do the right thing. So there is actually the need, I believe, and this is based on my time during COVID and then my study of history and understanding of the philosophy, the theology, and the political realities of civil disobedience. America, you need to become ungovernable. You need to become a cantankerous people who continuously give the powers that be grief, whether that's federal, state, city, the HOA, the school board. Like, come on, guys, we are the descendants, or you are the descendants of some of the most courageous people ever. Can you not have a tough conversation with the school board? Can you not have a tough conversation with the local city? This is literally, like, I'm sorry to be blunt, but are you worthy? Are you still worthy of what you were given? And my fear, I'm terrified that Americans will become victims of your own success and your own prosperity. And you will let go of that freedom if only you can keep the prosperity. But of course, that will be short-lived. And the power will be short-lived. It'll all get taken off you if you lose the freedom. This is the fight of your generation in America. And the reason I'm here as an Australian, raising the alarm and saying the unsayable thing and pissing a lot of people off because I don't want to hear it, and I certainly don't want to hear it from someone from Australia. The reason I'm here is because America is a unique experiment in freedom. There's never been another country like you. And if you lose the freedom, there will never be another country like you. And so this matters for the whole world. Australia will suffer if America gives up its freedom. Europe is already a basket case, but how much worse will it become if America loses its freedom. This is a global problem. And so I love Australia. I fight for Australia. I talk about Australian things all the time on my channels, on social media. But I'm here because this is the tip of the spear. This is the bleeding edge of the fight for freedom.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of America as the first domino.
Yeah.
And the one of the main problems here in America, and I think it's been going on a while, but it got magnified after 9/11, where the government made itself omnipotent because it was such a catastrophic attack. It's such an iconic setting in New York with the Twin Towers. And I remember my buddy called me, and I have to sleep with the TV on because my mind doesn't shut off. And if there's silence, I'm not sleeping. Well, he woke me up, and the TV's on, and I'm looking at it, and that's when the second plane hits the tower.
Yeah, wow.
And I was like, okay, first of all, this is the wrong president for people to be doing this, because he's a cowboy, and somebody is about to get bombed into the Stone Age. But you know, the government portrayed itself as like, hey, if you don't give us these powers, look what happens. Yeah. And then everybody started, you know, it's like the little toddler wrapping their arms around their dad's leg when they barely come up to his kneecap when something scares them. That's what Americans did after 9/11. And one of the main problems with Americans now is the government doesn't fear the power of the republic anymore. Yeah. And it doesn't fear the people. And the government should fear the people because they act upon the will of the people. And I always say government has no rights. Government has the authority that the republic gives them to execute within the confines of the Constitution, which is the rules for the government. And Americans, I blame public education for all of that, because you know, we talked about this 2 weeks ago because we didn't do a show last week. From kindergarten through the 12th grade, they're telling you to line up, sit down with your hands neatly on your lap, right between the lines, color in the lines. Do not question what we're teaching you. My daughter summed this up the best about when she was in high school. I think she was a sophomore or junior. She said, school is easy, Dad. All you have to do is repeat what they tell you and tell them what they want to hear. Yeah. And you'll get an A. Yeah. And I was like, this kid is 14, 15 years old, and she already understands that this is all. Well, well, it helps that her dad told her taxation was theft from about 5 years old. So
like any good dad should. So you made the comment, you know, government became omnipotent. I genuinely believe that government today regards itself as God. We've actually allowed government to occupy the position of God. And what I mean by that is quite specific. That's not a throwaway line for me. I've written an entire book on this. We allow the government to define what is right and what is wrong. Now, this is a crucial distinction. Welcome, Free. Nice to have you along. Glad you finally finished that rubbish show of yours. And
rubbish. I love it. Rubbish.
So we love Free. For anyone that doesn't know, this is a friendly feud. So the government believes that when it changes the law, it can change what is right and what is wrong. Now, the truth is right and wrong don't change. And the job of a legislator, the job of anyone in a position of making laws, is to try and align those laws as closely as possible with what is already right and wrong. But government no longer believes that. They believe that the laws are right, and then they change the laws, and they believe that the laws are still right. So they believe that they redefine what is right when they change the law. The government believes that it should be omniscient. It should get to know everything. You don't get any privacy. We should know everything about your financial lives, your bank accounts, all the rest of it. We should know everything about your communications, everything about your social media, everything about your private life. We should know everything about you, but you don't get to know anything about us. We get to hide lots of things from you. So it believes it should be omniscient, omnipotent. They believe that nothing is beyond their power. If they, in their exclusive and infinite wisdom, decide that the government should do whatever, then of course they're right. The government should do that thing, and there is nothing outside of their power. Now, in America, you do have an advantage compared to Australia and most of the world, which is that you do have these enumerated rights in the Constitution. You do have some rights that are written down. Now, they're violated every single day. None of your rights are actually honored fully, but having them written down makes them more able to be defended than what we have in Australia. But that's also why you need to be active, is because if no one defends them, then the government can violate those rights without any consequences, without anyone pushing back. So I'm of the view, from a theological perspective, as a Christian, I believe that idolatry is actually one of the greatest besetting sins of our time, and specifically the idol that we worship is government, and we've put it in the place of God.
Yes. Get to a couple comments here real quick. I don't speak Australian, so I heard my show is epic.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah. And use privacy coins like Xano and the Freedom Dollar. Now, that's a great segue into what we kind of discussed in the pregame,
sure,
which was AI and technology, and how we're going to see that affect the future. What's in Australia? Are they doing flock cameras and things of that nature?
Look, a little bit, but again, this is why I say America is kind of the cutting edge of this fight. America is the crown jewel. This is the place that they, the mysterious they, want to topple, and so they focus on you guys a lot. But yeah, I mean, we've got some serious problems in Australia, not dissimilar to yours. But one of the things to keep in mind is that technology in and of itself is agnostic. Technology by itself is neither good nor evil. It always comes down to the hands it's in and who is using it. And we proved that during the COVID lockdown. So, of course, during COVID and lockdowns, the government were using technology to control people. They had surveillance cameras and things like that. We were using technology to communicate with each other and to organize. The government were using drones to see where we were and to try and counter us and have the police where they could be violent and all the rest of it. We had our phones. We were watching the helicopter news cameras, which were showing what was going on the ground. And we were using that as our aerial surveillance to see where the police were so we could avoid them. So the technology itself is agnostic. It comes down to the hands that it's in. But when you see technology being set up in a way that really doesn't have a benign purpose, then you really need to start pushing back. So the example I give in the case of the flock cameras, you don't have to wait until somebody has hurt you to know that they're trying to hurt you. If someone starts putting bear traps on the footpath outside of your house, you don't have to have stepped inside the bear trap to be able to say, hey, that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that here. That's dangerous. That's going to hurt me. That's going to hurt somebody I love. If someone starts putting 15-foot cyclone fencing topped with razor wire around the borders of your property, they'll be like, oh, but we're on public land. We're not on your property. We're not violating your private property. Well, hang on. You're turning my home into a prison. And you don't have to wait until they've locked the gate before you go, hang on, you're doing the wrong thing. No, you're allowed to observe that they're building a prison around your property. And what we're seeing with the flock cameras and the surveillance state is the construction of a digital prison. And I can say that because I've spent time in China. I've seen how their social credit system works, and it is all built on surveillance. They have to have surveillance everywhere. Otherwise, the system breaks down too quickly. If there's only surveillance in key spots, well, then people can just do whatever they want to do outside of those locations, and the system doesn't really function properly. And so they have to have universal surveillance, and that's what Flock is designed to do. They make one agreement with a city council, and they put in 30 cameras, and they'll make agreements with HOAs and put in more cameras around the place, and then I'll make an agreement with the local city police, and they'll put in more cameras. Before you know it, there's a camera in every single location. Now, for those that don't know, these cameras, they're solar powered and they're wireless, and they're transmitting their video feed constantly back to data centers. And the video feed gets run through an AI data center where they will observe every single person, and they will give that person an identifier. And then if that person walks from one camera and then walks into the shot of another camera, they can go, oh, that's the same person. We already identified this person. Then they can see which cars they get into and what they get out of. And the number plate on those cars can be recorded. In some cases, they can pair this up with telephone listening devices where they'll spoof telephone towers, and they can now observe which communications devices have been passing through the same space. So very quickly, they can build a picture of who's there, what car belongs to what person, what phone belongs to what person. And the excuse is that they need this for law enforcement. If a crime happens, then they've got all this historical data that they can go back and see Let's say they find an abandoned car that was stolen. Well, we can go back and see who drove it there, who got out of the car, where did it come from, what were the phones that were in the vicinity at the same time. We're going to be able to catch this criminal. And this is always the way that it's done. It's the same way the Patriot Act was passed in the wake of 9/11. We're going to keep you safe. That's how it's always done. Well, funnily enough, we've been able to catch a lot of criminals over the centuries without all of this. This is not essential for catching criminals. Yes, okay, it is going to make it faster. It's going to allow you to catch more criminals. That's true. But what it also does is mean that you are now essentially stalking every single person. Now, let's forget the Fourth Amendment for a second. We'll come back to the Fourth Amendment, but let's even put the Fourth Amendment aside. If I follow you everywhere, Marcus, and I'm taking photos of you and I'm documenting everything you do, the car you get into, the car you get out of, even if I'm doing that from public land, I'm not trespassing. I'm only taking publicly available information. I can still be found guilty of stalking. Why? Because there's no benign reason for me to be recording everything about you and what you do. And the fact that I'm only recording public information doesn't change the fact that I'm stalking you. These cameras, they say, oh, it's fine. They're on public land. We're not surveilling you on your private property. Doesn't matter. It is stalking. They are making a record of everyone you meet, everyone that gets into the same car as you, everywhere you go on a frequent basis, what devices you use. That is a digital prison. They are building the 15-foot cyclone fencing with the razor wire on top. They are building it around your house right now as we speak. And what they're telling you is that it's to keep the criminals out of your property. But functionally speaking, it is also going to become a prison for you in your property. And here's my argument, Marcus. During in the lead up to World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, do you know who that is?
No.
He was a Christian pastor in Germany, and he very quickly identified that the Nazis were bad news. This is 6 years before the war started. Mm-hmm. And he published a pamphlet to the churches in which he said the church must not only help the people who get crushed, hurt by the wheels of state, the church must also put a spoke in the wheels. In other words, we can't just be there picking up the pieces and helping people whose lives have been destroyed by the government. We have to try and stop the government from destroying people's lives. That is a moral obligation that we have as pastors. Now, he was ignored. He was ostracized and ignored. He actually ended up in a prison because he actively kept working against the Nazi government, and then was ultimately executed on the orders of Hitler 1 week before Hitler killed himself and 2 weeks before the war ended. And I consider that to be a pretty impressive claim to fame. If Hitler knows who you are and wants you dead, that's a pretty high endorsement in my view. But his view was 6 years before the war, hey, church, we need to start actively putting a spoke in the wheel. We can't just be ready to help the people that get squashed. We have to try and stop the machine from doing the squashing. That is exactly where we are at today. The surveillance state is being built, and it's one thing to say, hey, we're going to be ready to help people who get hurt by the state. No. We need to put a spoke in the wheel. Now, we need to do this in a way that is appropriate. This isn't a let's go and burn down the city hall kind of stuff. There are people who are doing it through legal means. There are people who are doing it through public awareness and pressure campaigns. In London, there are people who are doing it by cutting the cameras down. They have a thing called the ULEZ scheme, and these blade runners is what they're called, that would just cut the cameras down. Now, I'm not 100% opposed to that idea. I think that's right on the very, very edge of what would be deemed to be appropriate civil disobedience versus just vandalism and lawlessness. But these are conversations we need to have, because if we sit there and go, look, it's just cameras, it's not that big of a deal, before we know it, they will have finished the surveillance state. They will have finished the 15-foot high cyclone fencing around our property. And then it's entirely up to them when and whether they lock the gate. And by then it's too late.
When you're speaking right now, quite eloquently, I was thinking about a quote, those that would give up essential liberty for temporary safety deserve neither and will lose both.
Yep.
Because I posted on Facebook, I'm old. I posted on Facebook in my one of my local communities. Our city is ringed by flock cameras, and they have them even internally within the city.
Yep.
So, initially we're like, oh, this is catch criminals coming into the city. What if somebody's coming in a stolen car, blah, blah, blah. But they're not only around the edges of the city anymore. They're inside the
They're
city.
everywhere. Yeah.
And I'm telling people, hey, there was a guy in Jacksonville, Florida, where a flock camera misread his license plate. He spent over 2 months in jail, lost his job, lost his home, and it wasn't him. The burden of proof to prove that it wasn't him that they were actually looking for fell upon him instead of them having actual evidence that he committed a crime.
Yeah, wow.
And over again is a lot, almost on a daily basis, where I'm reading about, police officers stalking their ex-girlfriends, their ex-wives, their whole families. They're doing all of this stuff. This stuff is being misused, and city councilors are signing NDAs. When they're signing this contract with the flock camera people, and the CEO said, if you're against this, you're a terrorist.
Yeah.
And so
and that's the attitude.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's that I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Now, what I will say is they try and say, well, we're not government, we're private sector. This doesn't fall under Fourth Amendment because we're not government. The Bill of Rights was written to restrict the power of government. Well, you know what it's called when government and corporations team up with each other and basically become two different arms of the same organization? We have a name for that. It's called fascism.
Indeed.
Right? Fascism, fascia. The actual, if you go back to Mussolini, who's regarded as the father of fascism, he defined fascism as the merger of the corporate and the state. Now, he didn't care whether the corporations were privately owned. The ownership wasn't relevant to him. It was about who controlled them, whose orders were they following. And for as long as they were a part of the state in the sense that they were doing what the state wanted them to do, then he didn't care who owned it. And this is what we're watching happen here, where in the same way that the biolabs in Wuhan in China were used as an end run because Fauci was doing gain-of-function research inside of America, then they changed the rules and said, you can't keep doing that in America. And you went, well, we're just going to fund it overseas. We're going to outsource it so that it's not us that's doing it anymore. The same thing's happening with the Constitution, where the government has discovered, cities have discovered, we are restricted by the Fourth Amendment, but if we get private companies to do it, well, that's a whole different thing. Now, that was what they intended, but what's interesting is that might not be working out quite how they intended, because we've just seen, for example, a decision, I don't remember which court it was, but in America, that found that metadata from your phone, so the phone's connection to the towers, etc., is protected against warrantless search and seizure. And I think that that's a precedent that could be quite useful against the flock cameras and any of these cameras that are just constantly scraping up data and recording it. This is a warrantless search and seizure. So their plan might not actually work out, but I think their plan was, hey, if we get private companies to do the surveillance for us, that's not covered by the Fourth Amendment. We're not doing anything wrong. And thankfully, that might not actually work out the way they thought.
That's exactly the way I was trying to explain it to some people, because, that separation between private and government, that's a huge cavern to cross. Yeah. And the fact that these, what struck me the most about the public reaction that I got from saying, hey, your liberty is being infringed upon, I was like, well, if this can solve one little girl that was kidnapped, it's worth it. Yeah. And I'm like, I get back to the public school, because they teach you that, government is here for you. They're your friends. Yeah. They always tell you the police officer is your friend, except they don't tell you the first time you get pulled over, he's walking up to your car with his hand on his pistol because he was taught that you were a threat from day one of his 6 weeks of police training. In California, it takes longer to become a barber than a police officer. Yeah, which I find kind of crazy. But the fact that we don't see an issue with this anymore, I blame swiftly the Democrats and Republicans who they no longer have any good ideas to run on. It's only fear. It's the culture wars. And I've always encouraged libertarians to stay away from the culture wars. I understand people's passion about it, but we don't want government getting that much into people's lives, telling you who you can and cannot hang out with, because like we said before, eventually somebody you don't like is going to come to power and they're going to use that against you.
Yeah, the idea. So I was raised as a conservative, and I thankfully I grew up, I recovered, and became a libertarian. And what I've come to realize is conservatives are like Boromir. Have you seen Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
The movies or read the books?
Yeah.
All right.
Both.
So Boromir is this incredible character. He's this incredible persona. Someone with courage, someone with morals, someone willing to sacrifice themselves for the sake of ideals that were bigger than him, someone who in every respect a conservative would look at and admire. The one flaw that undermined everything and undid everything was his belief that he could wield the power of the ring.
Yeah.
And that one flaw undid all of the mighty work that he had done. That is conservatism, right? They are sincere. They are willing to fight. Well, okay, politically not so much, but genuine conservatives, they're willing to pay a price. That typically they're more likely to be in the military. They're more likely to be willing to literally die and risk terrible harm for the sake of freedom, for the sake of fighting for America. The problem is that they believe that they are qualified to wield the power of the ring. And I'm sorry, no one can. No one is qualified to wield that kind of power. This idea that we can concentrate power into an entity that is as almighty as the US government, and if we're just careful about who we give that power to, then it's all going to work out fine. No, nonsense, absolute nonsense. There is nobody on the planet qualified to be able to have that amount of power and wield it well and effectively and not be corrupted by it. So from my point of view, it was actually when I was in the military is when I no longer was a conservative. I stopped being a conservative in the military because I saw the reality of this very flawed, very human, very broken organization that I had been taught to venerate, to worship, to see as better than. And I was in it and I'm like, this ain't better than. If anything, it's quite possibly worse than, but it's certainly not better than. And that was the beginning of my journey towards becoming a libertarian. But both conservatives and progressives agree that the government should have enormous amounts of power, gobsmacking amounts of power. They only disagree in how that power should be used. And to me, that means, regrettably, both are the enemy, because ultimately, power is a zero-sum game. If you give more power to the government, it must, by definition, mean that there is less power with the individuals. So anyone that wants to give the government more power, even for the best and noblest of intentions, is part of the problem.
It's always part of the problem because, what troubled me about Trump's second go-round is people giving him a second chance after he locked down the country in March of 2020. That there's two reasons. I'm not even going to front. Everybody who's ever talked to me knows that I don't let my kids. When they were growing up, I didn't let them use the word hate. I think it has such a negative connotation to it. But I hate Trump for what he did to my kids. He took them out of school. And then Joe Biden came in and says, I'm not going to let you go back. And it all starts with leadership. And the second reason I don't like him is because he likes his steaks well done with, and he likes it with ketchup. That is a cardinal mortal sin to me.
Look, that second one, I'm not going to argue with. Not going to argue. Look, like I said earlier, Trump is a very mixed bag for me. I understand the people who make the lesser of two evils argument. I do. I understand that. And I actually agree that he's the lesser of the available evils. But the fact that we're debating which of them is less evil is the problem in the first place. Yeah. And this is where I come from is this can't be fixed by trying to find that magical unicorn person who's actually not evil and is actually good. And then we put them in that position and, oh, yay, all our problems are solved. No. There should be no position that has so much power that, number one, it attracts such pathologically corrupted and corruptible people, but also that there is no one. There is no one. Only Jesus Christ himself would be able to wield that kind of power and not be turned to evil. And as best as I'm aware, he's not living in the White House at the moment. Yeah.
This is my good friend Kenneth Blevins from the great state of Oklahoma, a good libertarian. If Republicans are Boromir, does that mean Democrats are Saruman? Yes.
Yeah, and libertarians are Frodo and Sam. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Second breakfast, That was I grew up not only did I have the books, I had a little 45 record player with a read along book for Lord of the Rings. And if you knew me personally, there's two film series that I will always go to the movie theater to watch. One is Star Wars, the second is Lord of the Rings.
Sure.
Those are two of my favorite.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, speaking of unlimited power, how is Australia looking at the United States Zionist war with Iran right now?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. There's a lot of contention about why the war happened and what it's for and all the rest of it. For me, I think the simplest explanation, the explanation that I think holds the most weight on what's happened there, and it's been such a mess, is Trump has recognized that with the failure of Doge, the American economy, the American dollar is in terrible, terrible trouble. The only hope it has of surviving, at least as long as he's out of office, and maybe another 5-10 years after that, is if it remains the petrodollar. Yes. I'm of the view that the actual project here is about protecting the US dollar's status as the petrodollar. And I tried to make it fit. I tried to make the Iran war fit different motivations, and nothing quite fit. Why isn't he reopening the Straits of Hormuz? From the point of view of containing China, etc. Well, having everybody else have cheap energy would be a good thing. So why is he not bothering to get in there and use the might of the military? So as a containment strategy for China, it didn't quite make sense. As a war on behalf of Israel, honestly, I find that unconvincing as well. I'm kind of like, look, I mean, yes, obviously there's a very close relationship there. Israel are deeply involved, but I don't quite buy it. When I went, hang on, this is purely and only about American energy hegemony. Once I put that frame onto it, then everything actually clicked. It doesn't matter that the rest of the world is paying a high price for oil. It doesn't matter that the Straits of Hormuz are closed. What matters is that America has been handed a significant competitive edge, a comparative advantage on the energy front against the rest of the world. The EU have had to sign energy deals with the US. Australia has had to import oil and petroleum products from the US. Trump doesn't actually care what the price is. He just cares that America is where everyone has to come and get it from. And I think that that's specifically to protect the US dollar's role as the petrodollar.
One of the things I wanted to touch on, because I'm a bit of I'm an amateur historian myself.
Sure.
I'm kind of upset I didn't know about what was it, Dietrich, the guy?
Yeah.
I'm kind of upset I didn't know about that. If I was to dig into my archives in my brain, I got a big enough head for it. I probably would remember something about him because I simply watched World War II documentaries like they were cartoons and I was a little kid. But yeah. I think one of the reasons the United States does not want to risk it in the Strait of Hormuz is because the United States Navy right now, it's at a crossroads. It takes years to build ships for them. Yeah. And if they lose a destroyer, you're talking about $2+ billion. It's a very high price tag for a modern destroyer. And on top of that, you're talking 2 to 3 years to actually
build one,
build it and put it back into service and do sea trials and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Iran still has a couple of cars to hold. And this was one of the main sticking points that, everybody who was trying to figure out the Iran problem understood that when this happens, there's going to be a lot of pain associated with it. Yeah. And combined with the fact that he just put, these tariffs that he implemented last night at midnight Eastern time, they're not as high as they were before, but then you're putting pressure on the oil market. Oil did drop a little bit today. The stock market did well. It was a mixed bag. But, the stock market is all about speculation.
Sure.
And this could get a lot worse before it gets a lot better because now the Houthis are getting involved in the Red Sea as everybody was trying to divert their oil transportation to the Red Sea. Now there's another front opening. And I don't think Donald Trump plays chess. I don't know if he's ever played chess. Seems like more of a checkers guy to me. And I don't think he's seeing these moving parts because he doesn't like people telling him he may be wrong about anything. And that's where his ego makes him, to me, somewhat more unfit to be president, because if you can't listen to things objectively, you're not going to make a good decision. I tell my kids that all the time, because my daughter can get she's a very passionate person, and I tell her all the time, step back, look at everything, and then make a decision. You can't make a decision based on just your feelings at the moment. We have to come back from that.
So let me chime in on the US military side of things a little bit, because this war is changing, and it's been said many times before, everyone is always fighting the last war, the previous technology, the previous tactics. But of course, the technology has changed, and one side or other is going to be inventing the new tactics in real time. And the one that does that best is the one that's going to have an edge. What we've seen in Ukraine is the emergence of drones as a dominant factor in war. And what we're watching happen is drones being put to, autonomous boats and so forth. It's no longer just about little quadcopters carrying hand grenades. It's becoming autonomous vehicles, taking out ships in the Black Sea, for example. And what that means is, for example, these Shahed drones that Iran are firing, I think they cost something like $10,000 each to make, something like that. They're relatively cheap. And the interceptors being fired to intercept them are incredibly expensive in comparison. What that means is every time Iran can fire a Shahed drone, even if that drone does not accomplish its mission, it has hurt the enemy more than it's hurt the Iranians, because the interceptor cost more. Now, America needs to completely rethink how it does self-defense. This Iron Dome kind of concept, well, that worked when you were dealing with Cold War era situations where the missiles being fired at you were phenomenally expensive. In a drone era, you need interceptors that are potentially not even explosive. You need, now we have these sort of the super high-speed quadcopters that they're using to film Formula One races and things like that. You send one of those up with a lead tip, and it just has to punch a hole.
Kinetic energy,
correct, just pure kinetic energy. And we need a massive rethink. Here is what I would have done had I've been a war hawk US president and the Iran situation was unfolding. This is what I would have done. The thing that would potentially have stopped me is this imbalance between the value of the interceptors versus the attacks. But let me run you through this. Once Iran shuts down the Strait of Hormuz, obviously there's US assets in the area. There's going to be US submarines and so forth, a lot of listening going on. I think the US have a pretty good picture of whether or not mines have been laid, where they are or are not laid. I think the US has got a pretty good picture of that. If anyone tries to tell me the CIA didn't already have listening devices across the sea floor on the bed of the Straits of Hormuz long before this conflict, I'd say you're naive. The US have a lot of information. What I would have done, and I mean this is going to sound outrageous, announce to the world that you were going to sail a carrier group through the Straits of Hormuz in order to reopen them. And you tell everybody, we're doing this in 21 days' time. And it has to be a brand new carrier group being brought in from elsewhere that is fully stocked up with all of its ammunition, everything ready to go. Now, the 21 days is important because before you make this announcement, you've got all your listening devices in place. You've got nuclear submarines just sitting in silent mode in strategic places on either side of the straits. You've got drones and surveillance planes doing continuous circuits relentlessly on both sides of the Straits of Hormuz. And what you were looking for is Iranian assets or allied assets to Iran being moved. Because what you will discover very quickly is where all of their weapons caches are, all of the caves that they're using to hide. The mountains in that region of the world are genuinely treacherous, genuinely tactically extremely difficult. So you need to motivate your enemy to take the risk of moving things, take the risk of preparing for something, and you get to watch that happen. They're going to give themselves away. And so what you do then is you keep making a big song and dance. The carrier group is now 2 weeks away. The carrier group is now 1 week away. And you're making a big song and dance about this. And Iran, China, and others will not be able to deny themselves taking the bait. You will watch the supply lines coming in from China, how they're getting more missiles in. You're going to watch the Iranians getting assets into place. You're going to watch the refueling and the preparation of missiles in the larger centers further away. You're going to have an absolute plethora of intel. And then what you need to do then, of course, is a 48-hour just absolute scorched earth bombing campaign against every one of those assets, caves, everything else that you've identified. Now, whether you actually sail the ships through the Straits of Hormuz or not is entirely up to you in the tactical situation and how confident you are that you've got control. But the belief on the part of the Iranians that you're really going to do it, that you're actually serious. And if Trump said something like that, I mean, they'd be kind of like, yeah, he's bombastic enough, like he's crazy enough, he might actually do that. That, in my opinion, would have the potential to actually bring the regime to its knees without a ground invasion. But you need to get them to commit in a big, big, big way. This idea that you're going to topple the regime, that the people are going to be able to rise up when the people are disarmed. No, that's not going to happen unless you can get the Iranians to commit everything in a really big way. And the chance to sink an American nuclear aircraft carrier, that's the bait. That's what you use to suck them in. So crazy or not, and maybe that is a bit crazy, but that's, if I was a war hawk, US president who was okay with the fact that we're fighting wars all over the world and all the rest of it, that's how I would approach Iran. And honestly, I think anything less than that, we're kind of looking at another forever war. And like you said, it's expanding around the region. Like, where does it go from here? I don't see it getting smaller.
No, I don't either, because there's two factors, and you mentioned both of them, that I don't think Americans general American public opinion is against the war. But sure. The Americans that are for the war do not understand the fact that there is a reason why CIA bases are getting attacked precisely in Saudi Arabia and in Jordan and Kuwait. There's a reason why it's called a Theater High Altitude Air Defense, that $250 million, it might be $500 million radar system was destroyed by Iran and Jordan. Is because they're getting precise targeting data from Russia and China. Yeah, now, I think the fear with the carrier group and all that, and I'm not trying to play devil's advocate, I'm just adding to this. They're supposedly, China has equipped Iran with anti-ship missiles for that exact scenario, and these are advanced weapons that could prove difficult for the United States to stop. And you're right. The fact that, they're sending $10,000 drones and a Patriot missile costs $2 million. And typically, most of the time they're using them for ballistic missiles. They shoot 2 at a time because it's not 100% probability. And the United States is flying through its inventory right now, and it's turning to a war of attrition. And that's why you're seeing these service members that got killed just this past weekend. They're having difficulty stopping the onslaught, and Iran still has some capabilities. Not like the first, they're making this excuse, they're not shooting 500 missiles a night like they were. It doesn't take 500 missiles a night if you can shoot 25 to 50, and your means to counteract those are depleted.
Yeah, in the end, battles come down to your specific resources on that battleground. Wars come down to your logistics. An army marches on its stomach, but ultimately victory comes down to industrial capacity. How much damage, how much money, and how much blood are you willing to spill winning this particular war? And for a country in Iran's situation, they are willing to spill all of the blood and spend all of the money. America has a lot more money and the potential to spill a lot more blood, but this is just one little war. From America's point of view, they're not willing to spend all of the money or shed all of the blood, nor should they be willing to. So you've got this asymmetry in the size, the scale of the industries is obviously asymmetrical, but the commitment is inversely asymmetrical, if that makes sense. Iran are willing to spend every single drop of blood and every single dollar they have. The fact that the Iranian people, and I know a number of Iranians, we have a very large Iranian diaspora in Australia. The Iranian people would love to see the regime topple, but they're not armed. They don't have the capacity to really be in this fight. And there are some people that say, well, the CIA should go and arm them. And I'm like, yeah, that's never gone wrong before, has it? Like honestly, like this is just like, now we really are just repeating history at that point. So look, the whole thing's a mess. I would have loved to have seen America assert energy dominance just by increasing its own domestic supplies, becoming a reliable, cost-effective partner to export to the world. I would have thought that Trump could probably have achieved most of his objectives regarding US energy dominance without the need for any of these wars. But regrettably, he's gone down the path that he has, and these are the consequences. Excuse me.
No, No worries. There's one historical reference I want to point to, and that's the fact that Nazi Germany had a technological advantage over every single military in the world. Their scientists were light years ahead of everybody else's thinking, except in radar. The British had the radar first, but the Nazis caught up real quick. The Nazis were very close to getting an atomic weapon. And they had all these specialized systems, not unlike the United States. The United States was doing things on the fly in World War II. Their tanks were inferior. Everything they had was inferior, and they had to play catch up real fast, which they did because of the industrial might. The United States has the two greatest tank traps in the world with the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. It is impossible to invade the United States. So if you can't stop the means of production, then you cannot defeat an enemy. That's one of the first fundamental aspects of warfare. And the fact that Iran is doing what they're doing with in the fashion of how the United States defeated Nazi Germany and eventually Japan, it's kind of troubling to me that Americans don't see that this is another forever war, because there is no way you can invade Iran, because there's not a Iraq was a straight path from the Persian Gulf to Baghdad. That was just a flat piece of land, highway you needed to travel. Iran, there is no path to Tehran. Tehran, well, most Americans can't even tell you where Tehran was, let alone Iran. But Tehran is in the northwest of Iran, and you have to go through many mountain ranges to get there. And there's not something you could just airdrop troops into. But it's a crazy situation. I don't know how the United States gets out of this, and
so the next real opportunity to get out of it is going to be following the next presidential election. So Trump is going to have a hard time getting out of this. He's declared victory so many times. I mean, if anyone's counting, I think the US has won the war against Iran, I think sort of 45 or 50 times by now.
That's America.
Yeah, exactly. So I think he's going to have a very hard time disentangling himself. I'm mindful, there's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, someone who meddles in business that is not his own is like someone who grabs a large dog by the ears, right? And you can grab a dog by the ears, and then it's going to start snarling at you and snapping at you. Now, how do you let go? Right? The minute you try and make peace with that dog, it's going to bite you. It's going to hurt you. And that's kind of where Trump is at now with Iran. He can't let go of it now. So I sadly, I don't expect things are going to stabilize or normalize in the next 2 years, unless the regime really does fall. But honestly, they're being propped up by China. They're being propped up by Russia. They are still managing to export a bunch of their oil and get paid for that oil by China. So they do still have money coming in. I don't see the regime collapsing, and absent the regime collapsing, I just don't see what the pathway out of this is for Trump specifically. But for a successor to Trump, they could simply turn around and say, well, new president, new policy, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and that goes to, as we wrap this up, I think that goes to a lot of people think America is a flake now, because, it doesn't matter what agreement you sign with the Americans, the next guy might come in and just throw it away. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, because there have been bad agreements signed before.
Sure.
But you need to do things, I always tell my kids, do things the right way, where at least have a path to negotiations before you just throw something away. Say, hey, I want to revisit this. Give people an honest effort to say, this is what I find wrong about this agreement. Can we talk about this? That should have been the first thing.
That's a really important thing to keep in mind as I bring it back to civil disobedience before we finish. Being in honor, being the person who has actually done the most to avoid violence, trouble, unnecessary conflict is really important in any of these issues, whether it's international geopolitics or whether it's you having a dispute with a local school board. You need to go above and beyond, not to be a pushover, not going above and beyond to accommodate and to allow them to do the wrong things, but going above and beyond to have dialogue and find a resolution without it having to come to lawsuits or come to, big sort of ugly public, campaigns, or in the case of geopolitics, coming to war. It's very important. Your own founding fathers understood that, and they did that for 11 years before the Declaration of Independence. Now, yes, sort of the war had kicked off already. By the time the Declaration came, the war had kind of already kicked off. But before that, there were petitions and there were public sort of rallies that they held, and then there were a few flashpoints of civil disobedience, the Boston Tea Party being one of those. There was a bunch of stuff that they did before they went, you know what, we're just going to have a shooting match. That's what this is going to be now. And all of the work they did before that is vital to giving them moral authority when they actually finally make that declaration. And that's a lesson that I think we all need to take into our activism, into our lives, as we look at how do we try and make the world better. Make sure that you're not only trying to work towards the best result, but you're doing it in the way that means that you remain in honor and your conscience is clear, even if things go sideways.
That's a perfect way to wrap this episode up. Well, Dee, she said on the lighter note, she gave you a lot of compliments about your speech at Freedom Fest.
Thanks, Dee, I appreciate it.
Let's hear Topher say, that's not a knife. This is a knife.
That's not a knife. This is a knife.
I mean, the infatuation America had with Australia, with Paul Hogan back then, it was like one of the greatest trends that it's ever. Right. I remember because I was a wee lad, as we like to say, in the Black Irish community.
Yep.
So I want to post your website again so people can. It's topherfield.com.
So guys. Yeah. Can I say, unfortunately, I'm going to have to turn off the shipping to America. The tariff situation has gotten really silly, and we're set up. We've got all the right accounts set up with the right people. That's funded with money, so that when it reaches your border, we'll get billed for the tariff, and then it should go through to you. But half the time that's not happening. Half the time these parcels are just getting returned back to us, and then we end up paying for that shipping, and I have to refund the customers, and I'm actually losing money on American clients. So unfortunately, if you do want to buy my books, you can do that from Amazon. Just search for Good People Break Bad Laws or Good Christians Break Bad Laws. But I need to find an American-based fulfillment partner who can stock all of my merch, my t-shirts, my hoodies, all of that, because the current situation is just not tenable. So I'm sorry about that, everybody, but please do check out the website, buy me a coffee if you'd like to support my work. So Free, thank you. We'll have to have a talk about that and just fulfillment and how all that'll work. We need to solve that problem, because at the moment I'm losing money on my American supporters, which is an unfortunate state of affairs.
And we're wrapping this up, but you just opened a whole nother can of worms here. Tariffs are taxes and theft. They are bad for business. They are bad for international relationships.
100%. Yeah.
They are a mechanism that leads to conflict, and the consumer pays it, because as a businessman, you cannot absorb those costs on some bullshit like that. Damn it. That pisses me off.
Can I correct one thing? I've stopped saying that taxation is theft. I don't think that's correct. Taxation is extortion.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I like that.
Because theft happens in secret. Extortion is what they do to your face with threats of violence. That's taxation. Inflation is theft. That's happening in secret behind our back. So one of the t-shirts I'm developing says inflation is theft, taxation is extortion, because I think it's a distinction worth making.
I was hoping you were going to say that, and I hope Free doesn't steal your ideas like he steals all of mine. But tell the people where they can find you on social media. And
just at Topher Field. So take my name down there or my website, Topher Field, just at Topher Field on all the socials. I really appreciate the support and the love. I'm trying to reach American audiences more. So you guys are really important to me. If you could like and share and follow and all of that for everything of mine that you see me putting out, that'll start to tell the algorithms, hey, there's interest in this in America. At the moment, if I post something, I can make something for the American audience, but my algorithms on all my pages have been trained not to feed it to Americans, because normally they're not interested in what I post. So even when I do post American stuff, it just kind of falls flat. So if you guys could help me out, just get in there and just by default, every time you see something of mine, just like it, comment on it, share it out there, and just begin to retrain the algorithms. That'd be much appreciated.
And to my fellow Americans, we have to support the people that are doing things for the right reason. Topher is doing things for the right reason. That's, I truly am grateful to Spike Cohen for reaching out to me, to having you come on here. Wait, what is this?
So the comment before says, does Topher have an affiliate program? I'd love to sign up for that for his merch shop. I actually don't. I need to start to sort these things out. I'm not particularly business minded. I need to be more so because this is now a business and I've got bills to pay and all the rest of it, but I'm still working out a lot of that sort of basic stuff.
All right. So there you have it, D. Once again, Topher Field, you can find him everywhere on social media. We ask that you like, share, and follow. We ask for the Black Powder podcast that you like, share, and follow. 100%. Also for free, Are You Smarter Than a Politician? That's our sister show, our little special needs brother, free. We ask that you like, follow, and share his content as well, because there's people in the liberty movement that aren't doing this solely. We're not vulture capitalists. We're capitalists. We want to make the money, but we're not giving you content that is going to upset you with culture war issues and all of that garbage and all this stuff. We're talking about actual issues that affect your life, affect your wallet, and affect your kitchen table. So with that being said, this has been the Black Powder podcast. We always end this with this famous American phrase. I hope one day Australia can take this mantra up. It's live free or die. Stand by, Topher, for a second while this minor